it to you that's seen it. Okay, so we are continuing on really with the Christ story, with the nativity story, but not the lovey-feely baby was born, isn't that wonderful part. There's a lot going on in the world at this time. So we're going to look at Matthew 2, verses 1 through 12. Again, you're welcome to pull up your pew Bible. I'll give you a minute. Because I want to start with a quote here from Kelly Nikondia. She's, again, the author of the book that we've been kind of basing everything on, well, not everything, but quite a bit, The First Advent in Palestine, which is in my office now if anyone wants to borrow it. But she says this. Again, we're looking for Matthew 2, 1:12 while you're flipping there. But she says, Advent calls us to wrestle honestly with this truth. Troubles don't disappear just because Jesus arrived. And so she says the world is still harsh and riddled with injustice. And so again, we kind of know that, right? And the story that we're reading in our gospel today reminds us that Jesus and his family were truly, became refugees as they fled from the dictator's bloodthirsty desire to remain in power that we're going to read about. But then Kelly Nikondia goes on. She says, only a God who knows and shares our pain can ultimately transform it. Only a God who knows and shares our pain can ultimately transform it. And again, many believe that's one of the reasons why Jesus became flesh, fully human, as he even was fully divine. God with us even now. So let's dive into this pretty disturbing biblical account. I'm going to take a quick drink. After Jesus' birth, which happened in Bethlehem of Judea during the reign of Herod, and again, this is going to be slightly different than your pew version, but still the same story, obviously. After Jesus' birth, which happened in Bethlehem of Judea during the reign of Herod, astrologers from the east arrived in Jerusalem and asked, where is the newborn ruler of the Jews? So they had already gotten this call from God of what was happening. We observed his star at its rising and have come to pay homage. So again, they had seen the star and they knew what that meant. So we would assume that God, again, working in their spirits, maybe speaking to them directly, we don't know, it's not recorded. Maybe one of those gut feelings that we all sometimes get of, I really need to call such and such and talk to them. Or I really need to maybe go do this one thing, right? Those gut hunches that we get through the Spirit. They observed his star. At this news, Herod became greatly disturbed, as did all of Jerusalem. Again, did they find out about it, or are they all disturbed because Herod is making them disturbed, right? Summoning all the chief priests and religious scholars of the people, so anybody that even associated, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem of Judea, they informed him, again, because they know from all the scriptures, it had all the pointings in the Old Testament. In Bethlehem of Judea, they informed him, here is what the prophet has written. And so they actually just read this to Herod. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, since from you will come a ruler who is to shepherd my people, Israel. So Herod called the astrologers aside and found out from them the exact time of the star's appearance. Then he sent them to Bethlehem. And again, they could have gone on their own, right? But he wants to make sure that he's kind of attached to this, because if they just go on their own, he loses control. But if he can say, hey, astronomers, so glad you're here. I was thinking of that. That was my idea first. Go ahead and go over there, absolutely, and worship this new king. What a great idea. You see how people who want to hang on to power, that's what they do, is they take credit for things, right? And to make sure that they can stay in that power. So he sent them to Bethlehem after having instructed them. Go and get detailed information about the child. When you have found him, report back to me so that I may go and offer homage too. After their audience with the ruler, they set out. The star which they had observed at its rising went ahead of them until it came to a standstill over the place where the child lay. They were overjoyed at seeing the star, and upon entering the house found the child with Mary, his mother. So I suppose it could be that it was just they are astronomers and they know stars so well that they can follow things. And it absolutely could be, because I would hope at least we all believe that Jesus can do miracles, and God does them all the time, that we actually, then the star was actually moving to lead them. Or maybe it was moving like stars always do, but they didn't know what that was at the time, because we know now with our technology, but they didn't, right? So again, there's all these different interpretations. Does that matter? God was able to do it, whether or not he did or not. We know that he has the power to do that. But what's important is that either through the natural phenomenon of the way that God made the creation, or an actual moving of the star, God gets what he wants done, right? Through ordinary people. Yeah, maybe they were fancy, rich, intelligent astronomers, but God uses people, us, to have his will done on earth. So they were overjoyed to see the star, and upon entering the house, found the child with Mary, his mother. They prostrated themselves and paid homage. So again, these people who we presume had a lot of money, who just were kind of at the top of the food chain, they were on the ground worshiping this baby. Then they opened their coffers and presented the child with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, so they went back to their own country by another route. Now, maybe it was an angel, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just, have you ever had that where you just kind of wake up and you're like remembering like the last thing in your dream? And maybe that's what that was, that God just put a dream in their heads. Maybe there was an actual messenger. We don't know. Again, does it matter? As long as we believe and trust that God can and does do these things. So they were warned in a dream to go back another route. Do not go back to Herod. After the astrologers had left, the angel of God suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph. So we have more specifics about that one. With the command, get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you otherwise. Herod is searching for the child to destroy him. Okay, so there's a very specific thing, right? God, through an angel, or an angel of God, either one, appeared to Joseph in a dream. And we talked about Joseph a couple weeks ago, right? Kind of the forgotten guy. I was thinking of that when I was rearranging the wise men. I'm like, is this Joseph or is this the shepherd? And I literally went, doesn't matter. Here, we'll make the guy standing up Joseph, and we'll make that, right? And then I was like, but it does matter, right? It does matter. Now, it doesn't, and I suppose in the scheme of my little nativity scene, right? But in the big scheme of things, absolutely, Joseph was just not a minor character substituted for a shepherd if your Joseph breaks, from your nativity set. But think about all the things that he did, that he followed. Here's what he, again, from a prestigious family. We read his whole lineage. Remember, it took up the whole page of his lineage. So he was somebody, at least in the eyes of the Jewish world. And yet, he was willing to marry this girl even though she was in disgrace. And then willing to say, oh, okay, yeah, let's go do this. Yeah, okay, let's name him Jesus. Okay. All right, let's go and leave and not do what we normally would do, or what's comfortable, or what makes sense to us, because you're telling me that this is happening. And so they did, right? Joseph got up. He awakened Jesus and Mary, and they left that night for Egypt. And again, presumably this was much later. It wasn't, the day after Jesus was born. People do put different times on it. I've heard people say as old as 2 years old, right? Because again, we this next section, it's going to be children 2 years old and younger. I've even heard a little bit older, but traditionally 2 is the oldest people ever think, but could be also a little bit younger. So again, we don't know how old Jesus was, but they woke him up. That's all that matters. They woke him up and Mary, and they left that night for Egypt. They stayed there until the death of Herod to fulfill what God had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my own." But before Herod died, obviously, he knew what was going on. He was furious when he realized that the astrologers had outwitted him. He gave orders to kill all male children that were 2 years old and younger living in and around Bethlehem. I was really glad they're having Bible buddies this morning, right? How do you explain that to kids? He gave the orders. He, the leader who is supposed to protect his people, gave the orders to kill all male children that were 2 years old and younger living in and around Bethlehem. The age of the children was based on the date Herod had learned from the astrologers. So again, presuming that Herod got it right. So again, there's still a lot of conjecture through all of this. And again, what I think is interesting is Jesus, at least in the account, the scriptures, never went back to Bethlehem. Now, maybe he did, but scripturally, there's no place that says Jesus ever went back to Bethlehem. And if you think about that, could it be because of that harm that he obviously knew what was happening, or maybe at the time he was too little, but eventually as he grew up, he would know, he would hear those stories, right? Why is there no one else about my age, right? If I would go to Bethlehem, what do you mean there's nobody there, right? Okay, well, yes, all these children were killed. And so, again, we think about that of Jesus being fully human. And can you imagine that kind of trauma that would have informed Jesus, that would have been part of Jesus as well? And again, we certainly would assume that God would heal him and all of those things. But that's one more thing, right? Jesus was hungry physically, had hunger, right? Jesus knew physically what it felt like. And emotionally, when Lazarus died, he wept. So we know that Jesus actually then went through all of these emotions that we do too. And that was maybe one of them too, was that idea of that trauma from that horrible act. And again, then it was spoken from the prophet Jeremiah, because of this action was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, sobbing and lamenting loudly. It was Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled, for they were no more. After Herod's death, the angel of God appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. Again, okay, we assume Joseph's going to follow. So whatever plans he had, not so much. We maybe don't have angels coming to talk to us, but yet aren't there times where we have things that we here's what I'm going to do with my life. We watched... it sounds like all we've done is watch movies, but we really haven't. We watched It's a Wonderful Life. We do that every single year, right? And do you remember Jimmy Stewart's character, George Bailey? He says, I know at the very beginning, before all these things happened in his life, I know what I'm going to do today. I know what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm going to travel the world. I know what I'm going to do next week, right? The folly of youth. That they think, oh yeah, we've got all these things planned out. I'm sure that's exactly what it's going to be. And that's wonderful to have plans and dreams and all of that, right? But yet we know that life happens and that God is along with us then to help us. Okay, that's not really what I had in mind. We talked about that a lot at our Blue Christmas or our Longest Night service. That many of us, right, have these plans. Oh yeah, I'm going to marry this person and we're going to be together, for years. And then that doesn't happen. Well, wait a minute. Why? How could that happen, God? Why? So we can look at something like this and I think appreciate Joseph even more, but then hopefully maybe see some of that in our own lives as well. Okay, sometimes we feel homeless like a refugee, not to mention really caring for those who are actually refugees and caring for them like JC is going to be, or those who actually are homeless, right? So that we need to do that, but then also hopefully find some comfort within God's call in our life. After Herod's death, the angel of God appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt with the command, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and set out for the land of Israel. Those who had designs on the life of the child are dead." Joseph got up, awakened Jesus and Mary, and they returned to the land of Israel. Joseph heard, however, that okay, how do you say this name, Ben? Archelaus, there we go. There we go. Had succeeded, yeah, there you go. Ben knows all these old names. Had succeeded Herod as a ruler of Judea, and Joseph was afraid to go back there. Instead, because of a warning received by Joseph in a dream, the family went to the region of Galilee. There they settled in a town called Nazareth. In this way, what was said through the prophets was fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. So I hope through the scriptures that we can again just see, and again, that was most of my sermon, so don't worry. On purpose, I wanted to just kind of stop and talk about that. But how important it is that we are able to open ourselves up to God's plans, even if they are not what we are looking at. And then also maybe looking at what are some of the ways that we can be resistant to injustice. At the very end, the benediction in our series, which this one was written by Worship Design Studio. I did not write the benediction, but I love it. And each time, and you'll hear it again here soon, I want to make sure I quote it right. May the sovereign of love, the child of grace, and the spirit of resistance to injustice be with you, right? So there are ways that we can do that. We see Herod doing horrible things, all in the name of power, all in the name of hanging on to power, all in the name of, I don't care who gets injured or hurt, I want to hang on to power, so let's kill these children, these babies, these innocents. So again, we can kind of look at that and go, okay, sometimes we can feel overpowered if we have things like this happening in our lives, in the lives of our loved ones, in the lives of our community, in our country, in other countries, in our world, wherever we see injustice. But again, I hope that we can look at these scriptures as an example, a hard example of, okay, so some of these things I don't have control over, but other things I do. And that I can fight for justice. I can fight for the voiceless and the vulnerable. And I can say, okay, well then, you know what, I'm going to do this. Maybe I can't do this to solve this problem, but I can do this other thing in my own life, in my own community, to show the love of Christ. Again, I just keep thinking about this movie. We watched it last night, this Wake Up Dead Man, which again is a murder mystery. But it just shows these two different opposing sides of one priest who is very fire and brimstone and judgment and condemnation and like having people like just calling them out, not showing love, but just, yeah. And so because you're divorced, so you should not be divorced. So you should, and literally people like walking out hurt, never to come back. And then there's this other younger priest who happens to be younger, it doesn't matter, but who's new and doesn't have the power that this Monsignor has. But yet he's the one who is like, hey, I'm here for you. Let's just show love for each other. And again, other people are like mocking that weakness, what they call, as a weakness. So again, it's kind of looking at all of that and how are there ways that maybe we look weak, maybe we look not as powerful, but yet we know again where the true power is, because Jesus didn't come on this big, strong horse born with like Arnold Schwarzenegger body, right? He came as a baby. So I'd like to finish with the United Church of Christ has their daily devotional. Excuse me, and I'd like to just finish with that. I have a couple other things. I'll save those for next week. But this one's called Christ in the Chaos. It came out December 9th. But I just think it's really just very interesting. This is by Molly Busquette, and she uses Romans 8:22. Again, this will conclude my sermon. It's all around us we observe a pregnant creation. The difficult times of pain throughout the world are simply birth pangs. Again, that's Romans 8:22. She says, my daughter and I have a long-standing tradition of cutting down our own Christmas tree and drinking homemade cocoa on the tailgate right afterwards to celebrate our lumberjack skills. One year we went on a hike beforehand and came back to a smashed car window, a stolen electric saw, and a spectacular amount of broken glass all over the car seats. We drove to the tree farm and met my sister and her 4-year-old. We wrestled the 6 inches too long tree into the car amidst the sparkling glass and toasted our mixed morning. Then the 4-year-old splattered a tsunami of cocoa all over himself, the tree, the glass, the ground. He looked down. He looked up. He looked at us, paused a beat, and said loudly, "It's all right. It's just a mess." My nephew's prophetic pronouncement has become my mantra. With every fresh setback in my life, I hear his little voice. Every time I am tempted to give in to despair or fury, I hear his little voice. It's just a mess. Is it meant to dismiss the complexity and horror of what is happening in our wounded world? It's not an encouragement to hide our heads in the sand and ignore the suffering and systemic change that needs our attention. After all, you could drive around with a missing car window for a few days, but that broken glass is going to hurt someone eventually if you don't clean it up. But acknowledging that something is a mess and somehow it's all right can help us to stay engaged when we feel overwhelmed and want to check out. It's an entreaty to keep our hearts soft and open, to avoid assigning blame, lashing out, or shutting down, to see the mess for what it is, a temporary setback, or even a portal to birth. Advent reminds us we worship a God who isn't afraid of a little chaos, contradictions, wrenching pain, pungent blood and placenta, squalling, squishy infant savior. These are how the world gets remade. And then she concludes with a prayer. May this mess we are in be the last of the birth pangs, Mother God. Amen. So again, some different ways of looking at it. Again, some different verbiage that maybe some of us aren't really used to or maybe even comfortable with. But again, I love that. We talked about that for our series coming up also, right? To be able to just expand ourselves a little bit, expand our views. I want to expand to see, well, what do you believe? Okay, I don't think I believe that, but I respect that you do believe that. Or maybe, oh yeah, I never thought of that. Yeah, that makes sense, right? So we're not in our expanding mode to necessarily change you, right? Or change each other, change me, but to just be able to be open to understand other people.